Or the impossible wait where we don't know if it's actually recording or not. Oh, it is recording. Perfect. Okay, welcome everyone. Today is the 22nd of of February 2024. Prometheus Dev Summit, and we are starting with Josh, who is not here. Query screenshots and notification in the alert manager. I will poke Josh on the side, but also we have Björn, Brian, Simon, and Fabian voting for it. So if one of you wants to carry the topic, feel free to go ahead.
I mean, I don't feel qualified to talk about this issue alone.
Okay, I will poke him, and if no one here, let's see if he comes quickly. If not, we'll just move everything back to where it was and done. Okay. Gautam also just poked me. Simon is on PTO this week, and Gautam will be 30 minutes late, it seems. Okay, then let's go to...
Callum said something about having to leave early, so maybe we should do his stuff first then.
Where did he say? Yeah, but sure, we can. Sure.
Alex is here as well, so if he wants to give an overview, since he's the one actually working on this.
Okay, if that's okay. Thanks, Callum. Yeah, we've been working on Remote Write 2.0 and the content negotiation portion of it. There is a design doc there that we would appreciate comments on. If people are happy to have a look at that. We don't need to reach consensus today, but we'd look to see if we've anything obvious that we've missed or any other objections that come up. We'd be interested. The short version of it is we're not trying to change version 1 of Remote Write, and we're not trying to adapt it because there are too many things that implement it, and we don't want to have different ways of an existing protocol. So we've got a new version which is specified using the existing header. You can find out you can probe the remote server with a head request to see if what the remote server supports. If it doesn't respond with that, it's almost with a valid response, it's almost certainly only going to support 1.0, and everything fails back to that. We can support multiple encodings in terms of snappy, Z standard. There's options open for that as well, and that's all specified in the header. And there's the concept of a recoverable error. If the sender sends something and the receiver says, I don't know how to deal with this, the sender should be prepared to understand how it should have been sent and reformat that and resend it. And that's pretty much the overview of it. I don't know if you wanted anything deeper than that, but I'll happily answer any questions if there are any. Otherwise, the spec should be pretty complete for an overview of it without going into too much implementation details.
Yeah, I know people asked about supporting other compression options before, but if I remember who it was that was asking, they're actually not here. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't feel like we need to have a vote for consensus here. I wanted just to make sure that everybody was aware in case there was any major objections. Brian?
Do you know that the thing that responds to your head request is the same thing that you're talking to a moment later?
It's the same URL. So, it's the same URI. So, if it does change, so I have been very careful that there is a chance. One of the pathological cases that's in the design doc is you've got a server and you decide to roll it back due to some problem. And that's when you get this concept of either a 406 coming back to say, what you sent me, I don't understand. Or if you've rolled it back all the way back to an existing current, like Prometheus 2.36 or whatever, what you'll get is a standard 400 error saying, I don't know how to decode this. And you'll be able to deal with that as well. Or the impetus is on the sender to deal with that and then send the right thing. So it's designed, there's a little bit of statefulness in the sender, but you can implement it in a way that doesn't have to be stateful at all. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, answers my question. I don't really understand why we need to say this bit about head at all, but I guess you've thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not entirely. We could do away with it and just do, as the 1.0 spec says, of just send an empty 1.0 protobuf, and the spec says that a server implementing 2.0 should always respond with a header that describes what it understands. I just think it's an option to go for a slightly cleaner approach of rather than sending an empty request. Many other protocols do this by initial probing with a head.
You seem unhappy, Brian.
Oh, unhappy with the general state of the universe, I guess. I mean, yeah, if you imagine you're talking to a load balancer with 100 things behind it, then this business of I'll do one thing and then do another thing, expecting that I'm talking to the same thing, just doesn't work. So I guess I hear what you're saying, that this is a popular thing to do, but I don't like it.
That should work if it's down the same HTTP session.
Ah, but it doesn't say that.
Good. That's the thing to make sure is in the spec.
Okay, thanks. I made note of that.
I mean, in practice, given L7 load balancers, you probably can't assume that means anything. But I don't know. Like I say, I will go on record as being unhappy with the general state of the universe. That's not very helpful.
But what about the general state of this discussion proposal? Okay. On the one hand, there is not a huge amount of discussion here. On the other hand, I don't feel we have found a happy place yet. So, any thoughts on, I don't know, design doc, review process, whatever, or are people happy enough and I'm misreading the room?
I mean, so we did. I don't know if they're in the spec doc, but they're definitely in a doc that Alex wrote just about content negotiation here. We did outline a couple of other options. We can go back to that, and Brian, if you're interested, I can send you that link as well. Yeah, I don't think we were too tied to any of them. Head just seemed to be the one that was the cleanest. But yeah.
I mean, since you're kind of appealing to other people do this, could you write down the name of one of the other people?
Yep, we can look into that.
We can look into it. Can't do it off the top of my head, but yeah.
Because I really don't want to sort of second guess the state of HTTP protocols. Quite happy to take it that somebody else did that. But there are certain ways you could phrase it that I would find more convincing.
So for the intents and purposes of this call, basically write things down and discuss in text form, but no call for consensus. Is this roughly?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Josh should be joining us in 45 minutes. He has a conflict, so I'm going to skip this, but I'm going to keep it in here for now. While I have you, short point of order. Who is going to go attend KubeCon and who can be there on Monday already if we were to have an in-person Dev Summit? So Ben and Arthur would be here.
Yeah, I think my name is already on the list.
Okay. I've been traveling the last few days. If we have more state than we had 2 days ago, then I missed it. Okay. Yeah, just read it out. So it's Brian is saying that he could change his travel plans to be there on Monday if we have a Dev Summit. And honestly, part of my motivation bringing this even up is similar. Of course, I'm also currently uncertain if I should be there at like Monday morning or if I should be there on Tuesday morning. No.
Should we maybe decide on more of a time so that we give people a chance to travel on Monday and say we don't start the in-person Dev Summit until say 1 o'clock in the afternoon?
We usually started at 9 or 10 local. I'm not super convinced that having only 4 hours in person is worth the extra day. On the other hand, I also looked at travel, and it's kind of horrible to get to Amsterdam unless you
Paris.
yeah, whatever. But yeah, you're right. It's I just put the thing in the thing, and it tells me when I can be there. But yeah, you're right. It's Paris. It's going to be Amsterdam in 2 years again. You heard it here first. Not fully secret, not fully public. It's going to be London next year. Not fully secret, not fully public. Yeah. Okay. Anyone who has interest on this and who is not on Prometheus team mailing list, now is a good time to raise your hand. And then we just figure it out. But then we probably have something on Monday, I guess. Okay. So we have an old one which I would like to close out because we have been carrying this one for over 2 years by now. And while Ben wanted to write a design doc, I don't think he ever did. And so we should just have the discussion without a design doc. Have a flag to allow queries to include external labels. We did discuss this quite some time ago, but Ben just restart, I think, because it's been years.
Basically, yes. Let me look at that thing if I can remember the thing. Yes. So for queries that are, it would be nice to be able to use external labels in queries, both for recording rules and normal API queries, so that users can not have to think about whether they need to use the external labels or not, so that we avoid having to differentiate recording rules for Mimir, Thanos kind of global queries versus running locally on a Prometheus. So that because right now, if you write a Prometheus query in Grafana, you have to know whether you need to add or remove the external labels if you're querying against a data store that has those external labels versus querying directly.
I think that would be super useful. We are currently going through a dashboard migration where I work, and it's so painful. Like, if we have this, our life would be a lot easier.
Yeah, I don't think there's much of a design doc other than basically treat external labels as normal internal labels in the query path.
Would another option be to remove them at the Prometheus barrier? Because that's kind of how they're treated in the Thanos case. Because I don't know, like otherwise you still have to ignore them somewhere else in the query path, and semantics might get weird. I don't know, maybe the semantics get weird anyway, but that's something to think through. Like now we have selectors somewhere in the query that I don't know if there are any query constructs that might
the interesting bit is in the Thanos case, Thanos is actually adding the external labels into the data.
Yeah,
because it's pulling the raw TSTB data with a remote read.
Yeah,
and it's not actually removing the labels; it's actually adding the labels into the remote read data.
Yep. So I mean, yeah, I would have to think about that. I guess, I mean, would it make a difference if you just remove them as soon as they come into Prometheus? But I guess you could also just say, like, okay, if this matcher is there, it matches anything.
Yeah.
And this would be optional per query? Or like a general server-wide option?
Good question. I don't know. I guess that could be a query parameter, but then it would need to be also a recording rule per rule group parameter, or a default.
Right. What do you do? Well, okay, I guess there's some cases you'd have to think about, like what.
Yeah, there's a few different cases to think about.
I'm just saying, like, that it might be still worth it to write at least like just like a one page. Like these are on edge cases. This is what happens when the data in Prometheus has the same labels. Like this is how they will get escaped, etc., and so on. Or to at least think about all those.
So what do you mean by thinking about those? Are we back to write a design doc, or?
I mean, what would be nice, I guess, is to see like some kind of written down process, whether it's in the pull request immediately or in a design doc before, where at least you can see like, these are all the weird edge cases that can happen. This is what we considered, and that's what happens in this case with this feature, just so that it's evident that it's thought through in some way.
Yeah, I guess I agree. I should probably actually write the design doc for this.
Okay. So for the intents and purposes of this call, basically, we don't need a consensus and won't have one. It's but I'm not going to put this back on the back burner for future rediscussion unless there is a design doc. Okay. Good. We cleared out the longest standing backlog thing, which we still had. This makes me unreasonably happy. Probably only me, but it makes me happy, so I'm still happy. Yes, David is here. So we have open telemetry metric naming in Prometheus and open metrics.
Hi, yes. And hi, everyone. I'm new here, but I think I've run into many of you before. For some background, I've been working on the Prometheus and OpenTelemetry compatibility specification for feels like a year or two now. And we're very close to, I think, resolving all of the remaining open topics. But the one thing that when I brought up stability last time that came up that made everyone uneasy about stabilizing the current compatibility spec we have is, well, UTF-8 in Prometheus is coming, and vaguely we have this notion that that's going to make it easier to represent, or that came in the first place because we wanted to better support OpenTelemetry in some way. So the question I think for the group is, now that this feature is coming, how should OpenTelemetry plan to name its metrics when translating to Prometheus? So what we do today is most of the metrics start out with things like dots and maybe even some slashes if they're coming from OpenCensus. And we remove all the dots and other characters and replace them with underscores. Additionally, we add unit suffixes and type suffixes to follow Prometheus conventions and to meet open metrics requirements, because in open metrics, it is a stronger requirement that things have, for example, unit suffixes. And so the question, I think, for this group is, or one more thing, I've gotten a reasonable amount of feedback from users. Most of it's anecdotal, but generally people are confused when they define a metric called foo.bar and it ends up as foo_bar_total. And so like there's been a reasonable amount of user confusion and annoyance, I'll say, that we're doing this name translation. So I wanted to come here and try and figure out what the best story for Prometheus users is for applications that are instrumented with OpenTelemetry. And I've tried to lay out all of the options. So don't balk and say, oh my goodness, this is totally infeasible. I was just trying to be exhaustive. But largely, I think it breaks down into two categories. One is to roughly keep the current naming translation that we do, keep units and keep underscores and stuff. And the other category would be to try as much as possible to preserve the original OpenTelemetry names, so that when users write their PromQL queries, they can use the same name that they define in their code in their query. And I appreciate all the feedback that I've already gotten. So would people like me to go in depth into the different options, or do people have thoughts? Ryan.
Hello. There's often this thing in the open telemetry world, well, we can't change that, it's in the spec. So what are we discussing, changing the spec, or this is something that's not in the spec, or what? Just for a bit of background.
Yeah, so specifically, I guess in OpenTelemetry, there's a category of the spec that says this is how you should write the OpenTelemetry libraries. For the most part, that's stable nowadays. Then there's another category of here's how you should name all of your metrics and traces. And I don't think we do any logs yet, but those are the semantic conventions. And those are mostly unstable with some small things that have been marked stable. And then this is the category of compatibility specifications, which says when you're translating to or from OpenTelemetry to different things, here are the general rules you should apply. And that, I think, is entirely unstable today. So, and that's what we're talking about here, is there's a document in the OTel spec that says when you're starting from something that resembles OTLP and going from something that resembles Prometheus, here's the transformations you need to do, and here's the mappings and such. Fabian?
Yeah, so what I'm concerned about is, I mean, definitely the status quo is not great, but I'm concerned that we might, like, if we just do it, like, there's a risk we replace it with something that's even worse, right? And so I'm wondering, like, if we do something like saying, okay, we keep the original OpenTelemetry metric names with dots, but also keep the suffixes because we need a unit, and then we have underscore unit in Prometheus. And then because it has dots, it's a non-compliant data set, and so we need quotes in each Prometheus query when the Prometheus query uses a name coming from OpenTelemetry. So, I mean, there is like reason to assume that if we present that as our solution, people will think it's kind of worse than before just having a plain name with underscores. And I'm wondering, like, what's a good way to find out, like, whether people like that solution more than what we currently have? Like, I don't even know. Like, I have an opinion, but I don't know how to validate that.
I mean, the best I've been able to do is to write it on a whiteboard for colleagues that don't know anything about it. And mostly they pointed at the one that has the same name, but I also don't think they don't know any PromQL. So to them, they don't have the same heartfelt reaction to quotes and stuff that I think maybe some of you might. Bjorn.
So I think, like, just asking users that don't have context what they like best is, like, yeah, as you just said, right? You kind of need the context to understand, like, it's for the innocuous user, this whole shebang about dots is like, of course, if you don't have the context, it doesn't make sense at all. And you need, you need to understand the whole historical development and the plans, and why is dots such a hot topic, right? On the other hand, for example, this whole required suffixes for the type and the unit, that's it's also part of the context that was always very controversial within Prometheus, right? Like, I never liked magic suffixes. I was very vocal about this for like at least 10 years. And since we run into issues, so we might also, like, we shouldn't prematurely enforce all those suffixes when we could very well decide in OpenMetrics 2.0 that we don't need those mandatory suffixes anymore. So this is something where I think the context matters most, and that's probably why we discuss it here, right? So we can establish this context, which is of course also different for every person. The suffix stuff, I think, we talk a lot more about like first-class metadata support in Prometheus, and the moment you have a first-class metadata support that tells you this metric is a counter and has a unit of whatever kilometers per hour or something, which might be non-standard, then this would weaken the case for mandatory suffixes encoding the unit or the type, right? So I think this is pretty much in flux and depends on our plans. So I think we should discuss it here.
So I would still say in that case, the suffixes are super useful for anyone just reading PromQL expressions where they don't have immediate access to a UI that gives them all the metadata, or even if they have the access, if it's like a larger expression with a bunch of metrics in it, you will just be able to understand it much faster if you know what units stuff are in and so on.
Which still, I mean, the one point is then we all should use, is it Polish or Hungarian notation, right? We should all use Hungarian notation in Go and C++, right? Because you would need a UI to find out what type is that variable, and the Hungarian notation tells you that. So, I mean, it's a valid argument. I'm not trying to dismiss this, but it's also, it's not like there's a trade-off, right? And the other thing is, should it then really be a strict requirement, right? That's, I think the problem is, if like we talk about Prometheus in isolation, it makes a lot of sense to make those rules. But now we are talking about interoperability with a very wide, much wider ecosystem. And then those kind of very specific rules. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to like make this a requirement throughout the universe, essentially, right?
I think Brian is next.
I was just going to say roughly what Bjorn just said. If you're coming from OpenTelemetry, I think the best thing is to have the same names that people would see in an OpenTelemetry world, and to accept where Fabian was noting in the chat, there are some cases like buckets where it just won't work if you don't add that suffix. But yeah, where it will otherwise work, I think leave the name exactly as you see it in OpenTelemetry would be my vote.
I think Richard's next.
Yeah. So agree that whatever comes in through OpenTelemetry should be represented precisely the same way, because the principle of least surprise, and that's a large part of the motivation to pursue the UTF-8 UTF-8 support. On the suffix thing, I think I'm more on Julius's side from the arguments. I'm also not like I don't have super hard opinions, but as a tendency, I like being explicit about stuff. The bad quote unquote thing is as we basically open the floodgates for a complete set of things which are not named properly, again, quote unquote, there is an argument that this needs a solution anyway. But just being still being explicit is a very good thing. But one thing I feel very strongly about, I do not think that an Open Metrics 2.0 would be enough to drop the suffix. I think that this would actually be a both Open Metrics and Prometheus release to actually signal, hey, there is a difference. We are planning towards a Prometheus 3.0, which is currently meant to be hopefully completely non-breaking changes, not non-breaking. But I think it would need a major release of Prometheus to change this fundamental approach, because it has been in place since day one, basically, and it is a substantial part of how people are expecting Prometheus to work. And also, just to finish the thought, I agree with Björn that we would need proper metadata support, like first class everything, blah, 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 to even be able to begin considering this.
Juraj. Gautam?
Yeah, so I want to add, like, I want to keep the dots. If somebody put dot in OpenTelemetry, it needs to be a dot in Prometheus. However, I do like the unit suffix. I can see a world where we don't have the unit suffix, where everywhere you put a Prometheus expression, everything is intelligent enough that they can look up the metadata and help you craft the right query. If you're dividing seconds by milliseconds, it should tell you that you're dividing seconds by milliseconds and stuff like that. But until we get to that place, I kind of want to keep the suffixes. Also, because in Prometheus metrics, everything is seconds. So or more or less, we're kind of confident everything is seconds. But in OpenTelemetry, half the stuff is seconds and half the stuff is milliseconds even now. So it's going to get complicated if you don't have the suffix. So yeah, yes to dots and yes to suffixes. That would be my vote. Yeah.
Yep, just my thoughts on the affixes. It actually does say in the spec it should be there, but at least in practice with, for example, the Prometheus remote write exporter in the OpenTelemetry collector contrib, there's a configuration option to disable it. So there is already at least some end users, including my previous company, where we had that disabled because it for people who were completely new, not just to OpenTelemetry, but also Prometheus, they were already confused enough by why there were dots instead of underscores. And then to explain on top of that, like, oh, what is this suffix? At least for like very, very beginner users, it felt a lot more confusing than what it was then compared to the benefits of it. That's it for me.
I mean, there's the ironic aspect that some years ago, I thought we should just have a special character to divide the magic suffixes so you never get confused. And I thought the dot would be the perfect character to divide between the proper metric name and the suffixes. But that possibility was also stolen. So yeah, I don't know if I mean, I think what really rubs me the wrong way to make it like 100% requirement, right? And the 100% requirement is only in the exposition format, and that because it's not a requirement throughout the stack, it sometimes creates conflicts. I mean, we have this very infamous one in the metrics that the Prometheus client Golang exposes. It's impossible to expose the same thing as 100% compliant open metrics because it has a gauge and it has a counter with the same name, quote unquote. And I see more of those things. It might be rare, but it might still happen. So whatever we do, it feels weird if you kind of try to push a strict requirement throughout the stack, which now also affects OpenTelemetry and kind of the universe. And even if we keep it, I would like to keep it a convention as it always was, right? I mean, it was kind of a valiant effort to make this all mandatory by open metrics, but I think it's that would require the whole Prometheus ecosystem to be more isolated from the rest of the world, and that's not what it is, and it's also not what we want.
So for the purpose of the subject, we don't have consensus yet.
Is there anything that would be helpful for me to do? Should I go try and find OpenTelemetry users and get more feedback? Should I write out examples of what different queries will look like in practice with different options? Should we wait until UTF support exists and then introduce it as an option and see what the response is?
UTF 8 will, like, the initial support will be experimental either way. I'm not sure if people want, like, if you want to tell people, hey, we rely on this experimental feature for the conversion.
It would certainly be opt-in.
I think a middle ground between the two things you just said is, or not middle ground combination, nailing UTF-8 support into thin air as in just assuming for the sake of a document that it is already existing, experimental or not, and then going from there is probably the most impactful thing, because I don't foresee a future where we will not have UTF-8 support in Prometheus. Of course, the pain which has been caused through the wider ecosystem by OpenTelemetry not to be compatible to Prometheus in this regard is just too large. So it needs to be accounted for. It needs to be corrected for. So I think it's a safe assumption that it's going to happen, and just base your work on this.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I mean, I wrote the proposal very much assuming that that was going to happen. All right, well, thank you for all the feedback, everyone.
Just so we don't drop it at this point. So plan is basically you just put this back onto the agenda in X amount of time when you are done with updating your doc, and or what's the next steps then?
I mean, my thinking was if we don't have consensus now, or like in theory, that the likely best solution is to try and make this available to users in some form and get more feedback on it. But yeah. And I will come back here, at some point in the future, and maybe thoughts will have changed.
Yeah. Matching who voted and who is here and the amount of works and the age of stuff. Björn requires selectors to return matching series.
Yeah, that's I guess a Prometheus 3 topic. Probably very surprising for most. There is no requirement that the storage returns matching time series for a given selector, which is quite fun. And there is a very long winged discussion on issue number 8053, where everyone was super surprised. And then a single person insisted on this is actually super useful and we should never require that. Yeah, why this is coming up regularly when we discuss optimization, and my suspicion is that some of the more optimized PromQL engines that live outside of Prometheus proper will probably ignore this fun fact. The upcoming release 3 could be an opportunity to just change our whatever. Make this, I mean, there are 3 possibilities. It's I think I created a new issue, right? Yeah, it's also linked there, right? This is the new issue. So we could keep everything as it is and say, okay, if you want to really be compliant, you have to take into account that a matcher might return something that it's not matching itself. Or we change this, like turn it completely and say, from now on, a matcher must return only matching stuff. And the third issue would be you can kind of configure this. I think the crucial thing here is, are there actually those use cases that were claimed in that discussion do exist. And I strongly assume, I mean, there's this fun thing where you put a SQL query into a label and then have a remote read interface for a SQL database, and it gives you back the result. That's more like a tech experiment, right? But apparently there were, I mean, I assume Brian, the other Brian back then, was strongly advocating for this because he probably had a customer with that, just speculating, which was returning Chef, stuff from Chef in that way, like via a remote read implementation. But I'm not sure if this is even common, like now, 5 years later, or how long it was. So it would be cool. I mean, maybe in this room, somebody actually knows of like practical applications of this. And if not, it would be a bit of a signal, of course, not conclusive, not like exhaustive. But the other thing is that I was wondering if you can't easily, you could, I think, easily, like, let's go back to the SQL example. Why not let this remote read implementation just return a label that still contains the SQL query, right? To make it compliant to a proposed rule that a matcher must always return stuff that matches itself. So these are my thoughts, and I thought this is overarching and deep enough that we should not just make a call on an issue, but discuss it here. Julius, you might have context.
Yeah, I just remember vaguely at least 2 customers asking about this or similar features, or where this at least came up in discussions like, hey, can Prometheus integrate with other sources of data? And then I brought this up, like, this is the thing you can do. So I at least remember searching for exactly that article multiple times and sending it to people like, yeah, you can do this. So it has come up. And the last time was like a month ago or something like this, or 2. For someone who I think also wanted to somehow integrate with other data sources that contain more metadata, for example, and like this kind of use case.
And would those use cases allow to tweak the return so that you just attach labels to it that match the original matcher? Like, if it's like a SQL query, just
no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a SQL query and it's like super long, I can just imagine that getting annoying. I mean, I guess you could still just like aggregate it away after the fact, like drop the label if you need to. But I don't know. Yeah.
It's just like, I'm afraid that it's like a total niche use case, and we are essentially blocking any optimization on the Bronco engine, or at least the very obvious blatant optimizations you would.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Might totally be. Maybe other people have even more info.
Yeah, Brian might have.
Well, not really info, but I think the discussion on 8053 is essentially heading towards there being a flag saying, do we expect this thing to behave like a Prometheus storage, or do we expect it to do something wild? And the SQL is the motivating example for something wild. I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, I guess as of Prometheus 3, you could default it to assuming that things for remote read behave like Prometheus does.
Yeah, kind of marking storage implementations as rogue or well behaved. That would be like the middle option, kind of, right?
I wouldn't like to introduce too many Boolean options everywhere. It makes just everything harder to think about.
Yeah,
I mean, it would be
query optimization. It's intrinsically hard to think about.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're making it even harder. Like, shit, we didn't.
No, we're making it possible.
Yeah, okay. No. I mean, I think if we do it, then we should just like not even allow the old option. Maybe just get rid of that feature.
I mean, it would not be user visible, right? It would be something completely internal to storage. I mean, internal.
True. Yeah,
Like,
I'm thinking also more from the standpoint of code maintainers. But on the other hand, it will probably not be me maintaining that. So I'm just raising that as a potential. I'm just like in general, when software, there's like always this one, we can like add one option for this and then another option for this. And like each individual one is not the big problem, but at the end, it's just like death by 1,000 cuts. That's just what, just whether it's worth it to have an option for it is the question. But maybe this, yeah. I mean, breaking, I don't know how many users there really are of this feature. That's a really good question.
I mean, we could introduce in version 3, we could introduce this as a formal requirement. And if people really complain, we can still see if there's a workaround by like returning a label, whatever, which you aggregate later.
Exactly.
Not, then you could still say, okay, now if this is really a hard requirement, let's introduce this option.
Like drop a bunch of stuff, re-add the things that people actually complain about.
Yeah. I mean, Darshan just said it was never part of the formal spec, and that's part of the discussion in the older issue, right? That it's, I mean, nothing was formal, right? Because we just coded it together, and the code was the spec. And Brian, the other Brian, was insisting that this is a core feature, right? And I mean, for one, we could find out if we really still think that, or any of us was ever thinking that. And that would, if nobody thinks that's actually core feature, we could just change it, or we could formulate the consensus now that we think we should just make it an explicit requirement until somebody, cries, and then we can think about adding more options. But making the current spec and the future default, that it should do that, and then we can start to optimize things.
It may also be moot because the main user of remote read, Thanos, has its own PromQL engine. So,
which might do this kind of optimization, right? If I remember correctly.
It might do. It might not. But I mean, we can add optimizations. So I'm sort of stumbling over the fact that the optimization described in 8053 is not very good, and every time I think about it, I actually want to do a much better optimization. But in any case, inside Prometheus, we would use probably metadata from TSDB to advise what was a good optimization, and so yeah, effectively we could just not care what remote read, or just like disable all optimizations in the presence of remote read in Prometheus, because that wouldn't affect the biggest project that we know about that uses remote read.
I think that's a really good starting point. Yeah, exactly. Then there's not like one more Boolean config options that people need to read in the docs and know whether they need it or not. And it's just like a thing that happens automatically.
But it would be the same effort in the code, because
that's true.
Would effectively be an option, just that this option is set to false for remote read and to true for everything else.
So the developers still have to think about it, but at least users have zero thinking. Well, I guess they still have like, oh, why is my Prometheus suddenly slow? Oh, because I use remote read now. But that would only like hit 0.1% of Prometheus users, I guess.
We could still make it a requirement for everything. And if this is actually relevant, we could still have a non-breaking change for I don't know. Yeah. To not optimize is not breaking, right? Okay, but then we probably want an option to not have a performance regression. I don't know. This is kind of the chance to say no to like this behavior. If we don't say no now, we are in the same situation again, and then we want to say no in version 4. Well, if we say no now, we could still make it possible later to have non-compliant remote read backends, and they needed to set some flag to say I'm non-compliant. Anyway, should we find out what the consensus is? I mean, it's not binding anywhere, right? We needed to, like, people can still object later, but just to get an idea here.
Sure, can do. Only ask. I am always not certain if I catch all the nuance you intend. As such, can you propose a wording for the consensus?
I mean, the first thing I would propose is the easiest. Create a formal requirement with Prometheus 3 that matchers in our storage interfaces must return something that matches. A matcher must return something that matches itself. Like, that's the easiest thing.
Okay. Let's start with Prometheus 3 that a matcher must return something.
With the like caveat, if a use case comes up that is more relevant than just a tech experiment, we can add the whole like shebang of providing an option, don't optimize me, but that would then be an explicit flag that somebody has to set to implement this kind of remote read backend. And this has all the problems we discussed. I just wasn't sure if this is just a general concern or if people who were bringing up this argument would say that's actually prohibitive and we should not make it a formal spec. We should go with something else, like remote read never has to be compliant, but everything else has to, or something.
If I put a spec hat on, that means it's not a must, it's a should in uppercase. Because you need a good reason to
never rely on it, right?
Sorry? I didn't catch it.
Should means we can never rely on it, right? So I think there are three kind of approaches on the table. The one is we make it a flag that defaults to one way or the other. We make it a flag kind of right now, and it defaults one way or the other. The other is it's for remote read, we always assume it cannot be optimized. It can return whatever it wants, but for internal storage, we just optimize as we see fit. And the third option is what's in the consensus, in the draft consensus right now, that we just mandate it now, and we can add an option later if needed. I think these are the three options. And to come back to your point, I think a should doesn't help, because if we write should, we can never optimize, right? That's the same as not requiring it at all.
I am currently unable to parse this into a call for consensus.
No, I think this would be my proposal. The consensus, it's what's written there. We might add, but I mean, we don't have to add it. We can always add options that don't break the behavior without options. So it's like what's the word? Corollary? I always forget this. That's always possible. So we could just see if we have a consensus on everything. A matcher, period.
I would still add something to it that says we are open to re-adding it if we find that there are users who really need this. Just like if someone reads this, that they know that the possibility at least exists that it comes back, but like we're gonna break it first. But if someone really wants it, or we get new info in the meantime, we may change our minds.
Brian, with the wording now, it sounds like this is a requirement that is only valid for remote read, but not for other storage implementations.
All right. Okay, so I don't think matcher is a good word to put in there, but what is the union of TSDB and remote read sources?
I mean, there are storage interfaces, right? And in the interface, I think they use the word matcher, and that's where it's coming from.
Let me check.
I'm not 100% sure. Who has the TSV code in their head?
Matchers or label matchers? I mean, that has been the terminology.
Yeah.
The overall thing is a selector, like instant vector selector or range vector selector, and then they have matchers. They consist of matchers.
But the term matchers is it's also used in the interfaces we use for storage implementations, right?
Yeah. I think so. And you could even just write that matches the selector sent in the request, because that refers to the entire metric name plus set of label matchers. Because that's what needs to be matched, right? Like that. But yeah, this is fine as well.
So the thing that has the select method on it is called a querier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is like the Go interface to a storage backend.
So
I'm happy with querier. I'm happy with storage as the noun. Even though that's not an exact match to the Go code.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, now for too many requires the old expectation. To add a flag to optionally. Okay, how about that?
I thought the other option was not to add a flag, but just to turn it off when someone uses remote read.
Yes, that's what I would not. I would prefer if our consensus would be what's written down now, because I think it's the bottom line. It's simpler. If we already have this distinction, it's inherently more complicated, maybe for no reason. And if we do it that way, then the very few, I would assume that 99% of remote read implementations are compliant, and it's only for the 1% that do something fancy. They have to remember, okay, in Prometheus 3, I have to set this additional flag on my responses, on whatever, like in my config, however it's implemented. But I think it affects a fraction of the already small fraction of remote read users. So I think it's on average, it's a very, very small overhead, and it's makes it as simple as possible for everyone else, for optimizers. And yeah, most people just don't care about this. That's my opinion. And the question is if that's consensus or not.
So should we try? But also, while the wordsmithing was going on back and forth, we don't have a super large quorum. So to Björn's point earlier, this is not super binding anyway.
Yeah. I mean, as usual, right? It's binding up. It's binding is binding, or it's not binding, right? So it's never binding what we do here. I would just add this. If this is not the consensus, I would add to the newer issue. Dev Summit had this consensus. Please speak up if you do not agree.
Okay, let's try. Consensus. Starting with Prometheus 3.0, any query implementation must return something that matches the selector sent in the request, including remote read. We are open to adding a flag to optionally reinstate the old expectations should this be required by real-world use cases.
Not everyone has
Garth and Callum?
difficult ones.
All agreed. Anyone disagreeing? Garth and Callum?
I agree. I like this consensus.
Yep, me too.
Okay. Done.
First consensus of the evening,
Mhm.
or whatever time it is in your time zone.
It's always morning in IRC. We are lacking a Josh, even though it is more than 45 minutes as of my statement that he would be coming in 45 minutes. I'll poke him again. Should we have a short break for humans doing human things? I see one yes. I see indifference otherwise. So let's meet in 7 minutes at 15 past the hour. Yes, no? Okay, that's a yes. So 15 past the hour, 6 minutes from now. This should get people back. Also, Jan and Björn have very good poker faces. If people are back, if they could give a thumbs up or wave or switch on the camera, that would be appreciated, just so we know that they're back. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Still a few missing, but maybe if I just keep talking and we keep talking, we'll go back to 100%. So, let's see. We still do not have a Josh. And what's like deal? That okay. Intersection of amount of votes and who voted and everything. Björn, community channels once again.
Your last sentence was not audible.
It's you, Björn, community channels once again.
So I always hear my name and then I hear, oh.
Maybe that's on purpose.
Yeah, maybe it's the German internet.
Or
Yeah.
you just trigger better on the name and not on the rest of the words. Yeah, but anyway, community channels once again.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Sorry for being that person again.
Yeah, no worries. I hate the situation as well.
But Brian came up with exactly the same topic a day later in some internal discussion. So I guess it's. So last time I brought this up, the result was kind of we don't want to officially endorse any one channel, and I was tasked with updating our community page to reflect that better. And I had this as a to-do, but like I have always a million to-dos, and they never had the high enough priority to actually get to the like in progress state. But yeah, now I also thought, I mean, I want to do it eventually, but I also thought circumstances might have changed or we have more experience now, because I claim that our kind of organic approach is kind of failing quite badly. I don't know if Ben's still here because he's one of the faithful IRC users, right? So the one thing I see is that essentially IRC is dead, right? So there are a few people saying something in IRC, and most of the time there's zero response, and then they ask, is somebody here? And if somebody from like the Prometheus team is responding, it's Ben, who is actually pretty consistent with that. But like, if this is essentially a one-on-one, I mean, a many-on-one support giving by Ben, I mean, this is too bad he's not here. Maybe he's happy with that. But it's, for me, it seems to be weird that we have this as like one of the kind of semi-official or really official channels. It would be a bit different if there were like a self-sustaining community, right? And that might be on the users mailing list. So I'm so distracted by all the channels we have that I organically focus. I mean, as much as I hate it, I focus on Slack because that's also what I must use for work. And then I got sucked into discussions there. And then like the time that I have to like I try to reserve time to just like help people on community channels, but then I never get to the users mailing list. But the few times I do, it's usually very busy. But there are also people like seems to be more like a self-sustaining community where there are like regulars that respond there. Like it's not that like lots of people are talking to a wall, essentially. So this might be a bit more nuanced. Mailing lists also, of course, are non-ephemeral, so they always have kind of a right to exist in a way. But yeah, I mean, as much as I hate myself to say this, it really seems that like the relevant communications that are like chat style happen on the CNCF Slack. And yeah, I would essentially say let's acknowledge that fact and not create the impression that people can happily jump on IRC or somewhere else and expect to talk to some Prometheus maintainer. And then maybe there's only 1 or 0. It's kind of weird. And we could, I mean, the more radical thing is that we just delete the channels that nobody uses anymore, which IRC might qualify for. Not sure. So discuss as written there.
I agree. I don't like it either. We have too many channels. We have too few people to actually cover the channels, and if anything, we have a problem of diminishing total amount of time and hands, not one of massively increasing total amount of time and hands. The question then becomes, it's a little bit of a fight of everyone who has strong opinions about what one channel they want to keep supporting themselves and not being willing to be forced into supporting a communication channel which they don't hang out on already anyway. Which is one of the truisms about communities, that both the topics of the community and the motivations of the community tend to be long-term stable, but also the preferred communication channels of a community, and as such by the community members, tends to be long-term stable. So it's more a case of you want to kill my thing even though your thing is not perfect. And this is where we usually get stuck. But on a high level, I strongly agree that we have a problem which we should be solving for, and we currently are not.
Yeah, the kind of icing on the cake is that the Prometheus CNCF Slack channel, this is an unofficial Prometheus channel, right? And now in practice, it's 99% of everything happening on the unofficial Slack channel. Yeah. Jan.
Yeah, I mean, this is really just about messaging, right? And I agree there should be a clear, this is the official way of getting in touch with us. And honestly, from most of the reactions I hear every now and again, that seems to be mailing list. But that doesn't stop anyone from having so-called unofficial channels, and be that Slack or IRC or whatever. But the messaging needs to be clear, right? If anybody sends someone to raise something with the Prometheus team, they should be sent to the mailing list. And anything that happens on Slack or IRC or Matrix or what have you is then considered sort of conversational, but nothing that is really official. Or there is a clear mandate for Slack, right? If the community decides Slack is also an official channel, then everybody who is on the team of Prometheus needs to be on Slack.
Yeah, that would be, yeah, the most radical way here would be to say I think we are pretty there's probably consensus that everyone who is officially on Prometheus team has to be on the Prometheus team mailing list, but that's also like a closed one with like whatever sensitive topics to be discussed there, if there are any. And then people are strongly recommended to watch the dev mailing list, but the dev mailing list also has very low traffic by now, right? So if some people like want to send around a link to a design doc, they do that, which in turn means if people are not on Slack, they are missing out on so much, like Julius just realized, right? So saying that, so yeah, the moderate approach would be, we kind of say that most of the stuff is happening with Slack, but it's not like official, not mandatory, which in practice then means if like a person that is not totally unimportant, like Julius, is never on Slack, people might many people have probably completely forgotten that Julius is missing all those things, right?
The problem with Slack is that people keep sending me messages, but I haven't been online in years, so I don't read them.
Yeah.
And then
I mean, I would
but-
have done the same if the work hadn't forced me, right? So it's kind of easy for me to say, I've now like I what is the word where like I make all the concessions and will, even as a diehard IRC fan, I will now use Slack, but I'm not enforced by my job anyway, so it's easy.
I probably just need to go in the settings and make it send email notifications or something. But yeah, I think it's not like we shouldn't require anyone to be in any chat, I would say. Like mailing lists, yeah, especially the team one. Developers, as you said, highly recommended. Users, very optional, like if you want to help someone. And chat, hey, if you want to chat with someone, but like don't make anyone be in any chat, I would say.
Yeah. It's just the problem is if we have a lot of meaningful discussions going on there, like it's kind of
shouldn't. I don't think meaningful discussions should happen in any ephemeral chat type medium. Like you can have temporary ones if you want to clear up things with someone quickly, but not like in a mandatory, like, look, this is the official record of what we decided kind of way.
That's what I would like to agree to, but like now we never officially endorsed Slack. I mean, it was even literally written, this is an unofficial channel, but I would say that 90% of discussions in the last half year happen on Slack. I mean, a design doc, most people would file a design doc, would like send a link to the dev mailing list, or the real design doc goes into the proposal, GitHub repo where it's visible by everyone. But then I think most of the more or less informal discussion has already happened. And yeah, and if we say it should have happened on the mailing list to not exclude anyone, that's like a good thing to say, but I'm afraid it wouldn't change anything in practice.
Yeah, I mean, if individuals want to talk to other individuals there to, make their own decisions, that's one thing, but I don't think anyone should be required to be on any chat. That's the only thing I'm saying. Like the expectation shouldn't be there. Like Björn should always be reachable on Matrix, or Julius should always be reachable on Slack, or something like this. Also, I mean, there's so much noise in chat rooms anyway that you won't be able to follow anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we have created a bunch of specialized channels on Slack for certain sub-projects, essentially, which was very helpful. But that wouldn't even work if people, like this kind of semi-forces everyone to do this on Slack, right? Anyway, I'm talking too much. Brian, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I asked the question because the word on Slack at the top of the screen, it says the unofficial channel, and that struck me as weird. And I understand what you're saying about it, and I want to propose informal as a better term for what you mean. I mean, the trouble is the only people who kind of formally want to send us all a message are saying, please update the software to remove this CVE from my thing. And
Well,
we don't want to hear from those people. But
unofficial also means we do not control it, right? It belongs to the CNCF and we don't really govern it. Do we? Like the Prometheus channel?
What do you mean by govern and control?
Like set the rules, moderate it, whatever. I mean, nobody moderates either IRC either. But like in terms of, do we own it as an asset? Do we like, we didn't even create it, I think, right?
So let me mentally unpop the stack first and then get to there. First, I agree with Julius. The problem with Slack is people send you messages. This is horrible and it never stops. But in more seriousness, one of the foundational problems with Slack, and this is by design, is they eat the information and they keep it and they never release it. It is not searchable on the public internet. it is a black hole for information along several different definitions of the of black hole, unless you are hyper online on this specific Slack channel, actually. So it's deliberately designed for value capture reasons to be this way, and it's never going to change, which is horrendous from a healthy online long-term community perspective. We have to acknowledge it's not going to go away, because it's the main beat of CNCF. We can call it unofficial or official. It's not going to go away, and as such, we can't ignore it, and we must be there. Unfortunately, we as a project own more or less nothing, because it's CNCF which owns all of the assets. We don't have any obligation and no ability to moderate it. We can raise it with CNCF staff, and they will react in a short amount of time as to what governs it. It's the CNCF code of conduct is not anything within the Prometheus project, and this is again by design, and I would argue actually a good thing. Final thing in the popping of the mental stick, and this is me coming out of the CNCF TOC offsite just the 2 days before. There's going to be a push towards more transparency, blah 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 blah, in rulemaking and voting and such. So just taking that one aspect out, for at least things which are conceivably public, there is a mechanism by CNCF where you basically have a vote bot, and you have issues within GitHub, and then you can thumbs up and thumb down them. And if you are in the list of people who can make a decision, you are counted as a binding vote. And if you are not, you're counted as a non-binding and informative vote. So both of this is supported, and it's actually quite non-horrible. So we could break this one out from the mailing list and everything else, and also have it web searchable. Ending the monologue with, there is no realistic way to get rid of Slack, even though from a long-term information accessibility point of view, it would be good to kill Slack with fire.
But then why not stay with mailing lists, right? Again, Slack will stay there. If there is an official way, like the mailing list, to sort of raise topics, that adds some overhead, because then people really need to make an effort to send things to the mailing list, right, to get the right discussion on it. But that seems like not the biggest overhead in the world.
I mean, this would kind of imply in my plan update on the community channels page that I just explicitly say the real discussion should, or even capital must, happen on the mailing list. Just like pragmatically, I think we can write whatever we want. The real discussion will happen on Slack. The substantive, I mean, the final decision in the design or whatever. But if anyone wants to be part of the discussion from the beginning, and it's not a design doc that some of the Slack denialists will file, then the discussion has already happened, right? You have all the right then to say, listen, you should have listened to me from the beginning. This is all wrong. But yeah, this.
But that will be the case anyway. Even if Slack would be the official channel, then you would have, like, people will still miss it, and then they have missed the original discussion. That, I think.
I mean, yes. So I mean, there would be the thing that we do not declare Slack official, but we essentially should all be aware, if we are not on Slack, we'll miss out on things, even if we heroically claim that all the relevant discussion happens on the mailing list.
Sure. I mean, the same is true for mailing lists. If people don't read their mail, then they're gonna miss.
But if you don't read the mailing list, you will not miss anything because there's nothing happening, right? I mean, that's the sad truth.
Yeah.
I mean, on the users list, there's a lot of like users supporting each other, which is probably great if that works. But like the dev mailing list, which used to be pretty substantial and had like was also, it was not high traffic, but the traffic was very like there was substantial stuff happening, and now it's like 3 mails a week or something, and it's often just like whatever. Here we discussed on Slack XYZ, and here's the design doc, right? That would be the most ironic or sarcastic thing to write on the dev mailing list. It's like I mean, I don't like the situation. It's just I don't know how to navigate it.
Yeah, I mean, this, not to make this even more break this topic even more wide open and whatnot, like this plays into how discussions for the project happen, right? And I think there is like a vague approach with like there should be a design doc, and I think in the past it was discussed whether those should live in the Prometheus repo or not.
I mean, that's decided, right? We have a proposals repo now, and I think that works. And you could also see like the formal stuff where the design was formalized. I think that works nicely on it. And usually the rough draft and the rough discussion happens on a Google Doc, which is also fine, I guess. At least it's not in Slack. It's just, I mean, we could also, I mean, that would be the other way. We all commit here to never discuss anything substantial on Slack. And I mean, we kind of had this semi for a while, and then we got younger contributors who don't know how mailing lists work, and they just naturally did everything on Slack because the old men yelling at cloud were alone on their mailing list on their IRC. I don't know. Richie, you're moving your mouth, which...
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was double muted. As much as I would love for us to be able to say that we don't discuss anything of long-term substance on Slack ever, I don't think this is a realistic target.
Yeah.
So my mind immediately jumps to assume failure and safeguard when it against when it happens, not if it happens, to have fail-safe processes, as it were. The only thing which I can see as a safeguard is basically to move or to make certain that stuff which happens on Slack also happens on a different medium, at least to some extent. And it is less likely that we can make the mailing list work for this. As such, it is more likely that we can make issues work for this, GitHub issues. So my thinking currently goes in a direction of, can we have a special issue flag or a repository or something for this kind of thing to persist it, and at least have a step of anything substantial goes through here, and basically accepting that mailing lists are going the way of the dodo, for better or for worse.
I mean, I wouldn't claim that results are quite nicely documented, because we always put things into issues or design docs, or they are so simple that we just put them into a pull request, but then we have still discussion on the pull request. I'm more like, what's more like scares me is how that we have this creep where essentially the decision has already been made informally before it even hits one of those like less ephemeral, more open, more official forms, and then people might just like shy away from, okay, they have thought this all through, I should probably not raise my concerns now that I haven't been there in the discussion from the beginning. That's, I mean, I don't have proof of that. That's just how I assume the dynamics might already work out. But yeah, I'm just describing the problem. I'm not proposing a solution.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm more of the, we will not be able to prevent this anyway. I would love to be able to prevent having substantial discussions on Slack. Because again, black hole for information, it deliberately designed this way for value extraction reasons, so it will never change. So my thinking is, how can we make a low barrier effort to try and prevent this from actually breaking something? And my very unstructured, but let me mentally restart. Let's, for the sake of argument, assume we can find a way to have a GitHub, a Slack bot where you can click a thing and add an emoji to it, and it will start a issue on GitHub and start copying stuff over which is relevant from this thread over to GitHub, and then put a special flag on the GitHub issue or put it into a distinct repository which ascertains that we get email and we can filter for the email, essentially turning GitHub issues into a mailing list for those who choose to interface with those GitHub issues like a mailing list. And in all honesty, I would probably be included in this group. Just for the sake of argument, if we had this kind of automation, it would basically treat Slack like a mailing list, and it would extract relevant information from Slack in a way which does not horribly break their terms of service, I hope. And give a way for all the new blood which we desperately need in the project to interact with the decision-making processes in a way which feels natural for them, while still asserting that we have a public record which is indexable by Google.
I think that will never work because that requires people to be disciplined about how they use Slack and always reply to the thread, and yeah, won't work. I think what's really needed is a clear instructions on how to propose something, when to involve who, and then if nobody does that and there is an issue with the proposal, then just say, nope, you gotta rework this. You went ahead too far without following the process. Instead of what Björn just said, people sort of going like, oh, I guess they thought about it. Let's just move forward with it. That's I think how this works. You set clear expectations, and when they're not followed, then potentially the fallout is that people do some work that they shouldn't have done before discussing it. And I was just saying in the chat, we should really just discuss Josh's topic since he's here now, and this we can spend another 2 hours discussing what we're discussing right now.
I mean, I'll try to formulate some changes for the community page, and we'll create a pull request, and then we can all discuss on that issue, on that pull request, and we can see if we find consensus there. Yeah. Okay, Josh has a pretty big backlog, but we had this issue, this topic on the agenda here for a while. Maybe we should just discuss it. I'm also like, I mean, I agree with Jan that we probably won't make a lot of progress on this particular topic if we just discuss for 15 more minutes. But if I write something down in a pull request, then maybe it like helps to crystallize some opinions or line of arguments, and then we might converge on something.
So let's bump the community channels thing back into the backlog, I guess. And maybe also discuss it in person. It's kind of ironic. Whatever, let's time box this and spend the last 14 minutes on Josh's thing now that he's here. And I'll bump the community channels back into the backlog.
I mean, it's interesting. Sorry, Björn, go ahead.
Don't bump into the backlog. I will create the PR ASAP.
Okay.
We'll see what happens, right? Perhaps magically it will be worded so nicely that everyone says, yes, that nails it, and then we're done. I don't think so, but hope it's not a strategy. It springs eternal.
It's interesting because the whole community thing is like it's real. It's a real pain, and I have no clue how other projects solve it. I think Slack is good for what it is, which is like really good, fast comms to a certain extent, but like it's not a replacement for the mailing list, right? We still want the mailing list.
I don't want to actively stop you, Josh, but you had the highest voting topic, and we have 30 minutes left for the topic.
Thank you for telling me to shut up, Richie. Massively appreciated. Yeah, so like the topic is regarding screenshots in the alert manager, right? Understanding this talk in the right way. Yeah. So this is something that I was actively wrong about when I removed it from Grafana alerting entirely, and then the whole community, you can see it on that issue over there, came running at me telling me, he's like, no, we really want this back. No, we really want this back. And it's interesting because Prometheus Alert Manager doesn't have anything like that, right? And I think it could be a game changer to a certain extent if implemented well, right? What I want to do is when you get an alert or a set of alerts, you take the query URL that gets attached with the alert itself. You use modern techniques in order to spin up a headless browser, take a screenshot of the query in the Prometheus Query Explorer, and then attach it to the notification medium if it supports it. Go ahead, Julius.
Oh yeah, so this has come up in the past, of course, like people wanted this in Prometheus, and the one big difficulty in the Prometheus alerting model, as you probably know, is that the alerting expression is not really a great one to graph because it has filters in it, and so you might only see the last 5 minutes, and before that you don't see anything because the alert wasn't firing then. So at the very least, either you need to do because the filter doesn't have to just be like a single numeric filter at the end of an expression. You could use like ChatGPT to say, modify this expression in a way that makes it more like a graph. Or more reasonably, you would have to require the user to specify a second expression that is actually graphable.
So I want to challenge that because I get what you're saying, right? It's like typically alerting expressions is either samples or no samples, so you are not able to see exactly the history of it. You only see the moment that the alert fired and for what. But I don't think that's necessarily not useful. I find it useful, for example. Oh, sorry, something notifications popping up. I find it useful, for example, in order to know, like how long has this been a problem? Because sometimes I don't remember for how long I set the alert for, right? Like, so what's my for? In this case, is it 5 minutes, is it 50 minutes, is it 20 minutes, right? And if I'm able to see the time of that, I'm like, okay, cool, yeah, this is a big problem because it's been going on for a while, right? The other use case to that is like when you get really big errors and you haven't properly used annotations in order to determine the error rate of that. So like, let's say that you're having 95% of errors in your endpoint because that's what you're measuring over, I don't know, over 10%. If you need to rely on annotations in order to tell you, yeah, this is the percentage of errors in relation to the samples that are actually coming out in order to know. But like some people don't necessarily set that, right? But if you look at the graph, you're able to see that, it's at 0.90 or 90%, and you're able to tell, oh no, yeah, this is a really big problem at the end of the day. So
I forgot, do we send the alert sample value not just as an annotation, but like to the alert manager?
We don't send the sample value. We just send the
don't. Okay. Yeah. We do have the first thing you mentioned, the active since time, right? Like when did this alert start firing?
We do.
Yeah. I still think like it would be a little bit of a shame to add this feature, but then not have the kind of thing that everyone would expect, which is like see how this actually, the underlying system actually behaved over the last whatever, an hour or something.
No, yeah, you make a good point on that. Let's talk about. Sorry, someone raised their hand. Go, Richie. Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I think many things. But I think we should always have the ability to have a well-defined way to include a link back to whatever the visualization is. whatever the visualization might be. And I think that we are kind of building a foot gun, but foot guns are okay, as we said a few months or years ago. My immediate read on the discussion up to now is we are discussing the how, not the if. So I think having a discussion about what are the safeguards, like for example, should I be able to say X amount is, of maximum file size as a configuration and have a say in default, and maybe have behavior of if there's high contention or a high load on the alert manager, if there is a flood of alerts coming in, can I drop the images, or maybe even tell through the API, please don't even send the images because I'm currently super busy and it's much more important to get the alert out, all of them, rather than have a few and have nice images in the thing. Because my read is we are not discussing even the if we should do it. We already have agreement on the if. It's much more about the what are the behaviors and the safeguards of the system. Okay, Julius disagrees. But Jan is
Yeah, I would make the if very dependent on the how, like how feasible it is and how useful that would be then.
I thought that what we were discussing, I'm on the same page as Julius as well.
I mean, that the if is dependent on a decent how is kind of self-evident, because if it's a bad how, the if becomes a no. But
so we agree that that it would be really useful to have something that works like in other systems, if in the Prometheus model it could somehow be made to fit that well enough.
While I think so, Jan raised his hand and we keep talking over his hand, so I'm going to shut up and shut everyone else up.
That's all right. I think reframing this might be a way forward in this current discussion, because this has been proposed before Dev Summit number 9, so it's a while ago. Basically, back then the proposal was, I think it was called custom webhooks, but basically it was like augmenting alert notifications with data from external systems, right? And that's sort of what this is talking about.
That's too generic, I think, Jan, because I think it's a black hole. I don't want to go there. I think I want to keep the conversation focused on, like taking a screenshot of something and then just paste it as part of the attachment in there.
Sure, but I mean, Prometheus is an external system to Alert Manager, right? So yeah. I think it has a lot of insight. Basically, there was a consensus to split this into subtopics, which I don't think ever happened. But the concern was always about Alert Manager must not depend on anything that could prevent alerts from going out, right? And I think that's sort of the core of the topic of the problem here.
And I understand that. I can appreciate that 100%, because like that was my motivation for removing it from Grafana, right? Like my motivation for removing Grafana is like this slows down the notification pipeline. I don't want it, even if it's opt-in. I think we should just get rid of it entirely, right? And the community came back at me saying, "Hey, you're not right, right? It's like I want this. I don't care about my alerts being delivered, a little bit late. It's like I need the screenshot because like when I'm being woken up at night." Is like, I just want to see at a glance whenever this is right or not. And that's the argument that I'm putting forward, right? It's like, I'm putting myself in the shoes of the user that don't want this and trying to see how can we make it work.
Yeah, and I think the sort of the enrichment proposal makes a lot of sense. It's more of a UI question on how to frame this to tell people explicitly if they configure say Prometheus screenshots, and they have to set a timeout, and they set 60 seconds, then their alerts might be delayed by 60 seconds, right? And or they might not ever come, right? With like, when you add 60-second delays and keep things in memory, you open yourself up to the risk of running out of memory, and then things die and things get dropped. Like, I think if that's obvious enough or made obvious enough to people.
Yeah, because of how group timing works, right? It's like you can end up having up to a minute, I believe by default is 15.5.1, up to a minute by default until your alert fires, depending on when it fired and whatever is the first time. So there's time in the pipeline for you to, try and take the screenshot in a sensible manner and then put it that way. So like there's definitely ways in which we can, like optimize this as much as possible should we want to do it. So I agree with what you're saying.
You can also only make this part of an update to the alert. I think there's plenty of ways to build in safeguards, and I think we should be having a bouquet of safeguards, or must have a bouquet of safeguards in place for this.
Go for it, Julius.
I think it's more interesting to first discuss not the safeguards, but like how would it even semantically work? And for example, in the alert manager, a group could consist of alerts, potentially even from different alerting rules with different expressions.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it would either have to be an per alert element kind of thing, or you kind of look at what are the common alert generator sources for this group, and like for each one of them we show one graph with all the alerts in them, like with all the series that are part of that or so. So that's just like I don't know, like do you have already some idea on that?
Yeah, so like the way that we solve that is what we just show the first one, right? We don't try to put like as many graphs as you have. We just default to the first one, and then if you want to know more, then go to where you want to go.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, I expected kind of like you would just see a graph with all the series in it, like.
No, because we have, as you said, we have the common structure that allows you to extract what's common between these alerts, and if they are all the same, then no problem solved, no harm done. But if they have multiple, we certainly don't want to take screenshots of multiple. We also allow the user to control this, right? So like we have the concept of private annotations in Grafana alerting, and what that does is you're allowed to match an alert rule to a dashboard, right? And if that happens, then we know that what you want is a screenshot of a particular dashboard and not necessarily the alert query. So we use that in order to find the right dashboard, takes the screenshot of the dashboard, and then attach it to the alert as it goes along. And I was thinking when you were starting, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
No, I think that makes sense. Like you send the correct me if I don't understand it correctly, but you send the metadata to Alert Manager. This is how you can get the graph. I'm not sending it to you yet. And then Alert Manager would have like 10,000 alerts in this one group. It would pick the first one. It goes to that endpoint and gets back like a PNG or something, but only like synchronously as it's sending a notification or something. Maybe not synchronously, but like only in that case, right?
Yeah, we start requesting the alert the moment you receive it, right? But as you know, the moment you receive it does not necessarily mean the moment it's delivered, right? It depends on what setup you are and what you have in mind. So yeah, we start requesting the screenshot the moment you receive it, and then on the notifier itself, we try to find it from like a bank of notifications that we have stored in memory, and then just grab the alert from there and attach it to the image at runtime in order to minimize the waiting time. As I was saying, sorry to interrupt you there, Dan. I want to say one more thing of thought. So as I was saying, right, is like one idea is allowing the user to define what query would they like to be graphed, which aligns with what you were saying before, right? Which is the same thing we do with dashboards, right? We can introduce the concept of, a special annotation or a special label that allows you to define what query do you want to be graphed on your rule, so that when we get to the alert manager and we find this label, we're able to say, okay, so this is the actual query / URL that we're supposed to take a screenshot of in order to attach it to that, and not necessarily the alert query in order to match what you would expect.
Yep, from my first thinking, at least that makes sense to me. Yeah.
So go ahead, James. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just thinking, doesn't it make sense to rather attach this to the alert, to the notification routing? Because then it's up to the user to sort of group their alerts and then sort of come up with a sensible external data fragment, artifact, whatever that is. We're talking about screenshots, but it might be something else, right? It's up to the user to sort of make that fit their own grouping. And of course, that's a little more complicated with like wait intervals and sort of having the data up to date, but that probably can be solved with like some sensible templating or so.
It also requires special, infrastructure in order to be able to do that. I don't know, like we do that differently with an entirely different architecture in Grafana, because Grafana needed the way in order to take screenshot anyways, right? So like I would need to look into how we bake that into the whole Prometheus model, right? And I think this is where it starts to get interesting, right? It's like, how do we make sure that expectations are a match when it comes to enabling this feature? Because I imagine it's going to be pretty advanced, right? And that not everyone will be able to get it with just, it'll need a little bit more than a simple config change, it feels. So you certainly need to know what you're doing.
Have to drop because we're out of time, but feel free to stay. Bye-bye.
Okay, so we didn't have time for consensus.
Yeah. Do we?
It's fine. It's like we can continue
so
to
far.
talk about this. There's no like big deadline. We're not going to do this anytime
Okay.
soon. You can drop. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay,
We can
then
continue to talk about it.
I also need to drop. I'll bounce this back to the thing, and ideally we just start with this topic next time, and then we'll hopefully get through with it.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Yep.
Cool.